Wednesday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case that could mean the end of a key provision of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. At the heart of the case is the question of whether states with a long history of racial discrimination must still get permission from the Justice Department before changing their voting laws. Now, we're going to have to wait until summer for the court's decision, but we can take a pretty good guess about what one of the justices thinks about the VRA right now. In comments that made lawyers gasp when they were listening at the court, he made no secret of his feelings about the law, and that is why he is getting my letter today. Dear Justice Scalia, it's me, Melissa, and by now, we know you well enough to know that there is not much you can say or do that would come as a surprise. We can set our watches by the decisions that you predictably make that are always in alignment with the court's most radically conservative reasoning. We know that unlike your friend, Justice Clarence Thomas, who has a permanent mute button on, you will always voice an opinion, and it will be heavily influenced by your political agenda. But even given all of that, what you had to say during Wednesday's oral arguments still came as a genuine shock. Commenting on Congress's nearly unanimous reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006, you said, quote, "I don't think that's attributable to the fact that it is so much clearer now that we need this. I think it is attributable, very likely attributable, to a phenomenon that is called perpetuation of racial entitlement." You went on to say, "I'm fairly confident it will be reenacted in perpetuity unless a court can say it does not comport with the Constitution. It's a concern that this is not the kind of question you can leave to Congress." Racial entitlement? Not a question you can leave for Congress. Look, even for you, Justice Scalia, this is a particularly willful misreading of the Constitution you claim to adore. So, let's take a look at that august document. Right here in Section 5 of the 14th Amendment, and again in Section 2 of the 15th Amendment, is in fact the same entitlement, a congressional entitlement, and it reads, "The Congress shall have power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article." You see, Congress does, in fact, have the authority to enforce both equal protection and the franchise for American citizens, especially when those citizens live in the former Confederate states. In fact, the 14th Amendment spends much of Sections 2, 3, and 4 spelling out precisely how those states who were involved in insurrection and rebellion will be treated differently. Because these were states where the economies and culture rested on intergenerational chattel bondage of human beings. And they were so determined to keep holding human beings in slavery that they got together in armed rebellion against our country. Some of those same states, more than 150 years later, are still trying to pass laws that would deny the right to vote to the very people the Voting Rights Act and Section 5 in particular were meant to protect. So excuse me, Antonin, I'm a little dismayed that you now describe the rights of citizenship as a racial entitlement. Contrary to what you are suggesting, the Voting Rights Act was no gift given by the government to black people. Its primary purpose was to enforce a right that was already enshrined in the Constitution, but had been repeatedly flouted by Southern governments. And here's what you miss, Scalia. A great thing occurred in the 1860s when Congress had to grapple with how to include the formerly enslaved within the circle of citizenship. That effort led Congress to articulate due process, equal protection, and a federally protected right to vote. And those pillars of citizenship apply to everyone. It's the opposite of a special entitlement. But the constitutional amendments, they just weren't enough. And it took an act of Congress almost 100 years later to make those promises a reality for all. So, Justice Scalia, when you spew that entitlement discourse from the bench, you undermine the very core of our democracy. But you know what? I'm still going to say thank you, because on Wednesday you showed all of us exactly who you are. And in the words of the late, great poet, the notorious B.I.G., if we didn't know, now we know. Sincerely, Melissa.